We've done that for one of the directives. Let's also now do it for one of the controllers. Let's do the person edit controller. So I'm going to drag that over to my components there again, and I'm going to change that also to component. And I'm going to do pretty much exactly the same as I did before. So I'm going to create component definition object. So let person edit. Now you can call it whatever you want. I'm just using this as something to clearly define this is a definition of a component there. Again, selector. Now we're going to have to do something a little bit different now, because prior to this, we were only using this as a controller, and then we were relying on things like the root configuration. So with controllers, it's a little bit different. We now need to make our controllers behave a little bit more like how we were making directives behave in our old AngularJS applications. So in my case here, I was just linking this controller together with the template for that controller using UI router. I may have also just been using something like an ng controller attribute in the HTML directly. I could have been using it in various other ways, but now we need to start changing our controllers so they are then used just as we were using directives. So specifically, we need to refer to them via tag. So with this one, we're now going to refer to via a tag called person edit. So it needs to have a selector, just like our card component selected before. And the selector is going to be a camel case, a person edit, just like this. So this is now going to map to person edit in our HTML template. Okay. So again, we need a template, and I want to just inline that in just like the same way I did before. So let me grab the edit template here. Grab that. And I'm just going to go back into the person edit component there, and I'm just going to paste it in. Just like this. Let's close it out for now. And again, we need a bindings property. But with the case of our controller, because we're not kind of passing any information to it, we can just leave that blank for now. And then again, we need another controller. And again, we're going to use a class. So we're going to use a class of person edit controller. And now we're just going to have to essentially replicate this controller logic here as a class. So you can see here in our control logic, we have a save function and a remove function. We're going to have to add those save and remove functions in our new class-based controller above. And it's also, you can see it's got some properties. It's got the contacts property, it's got the person property, and a few little other ones there. So it's also, you can see it's using the contacts property, a person property, but you can also see from here, we're also seem to be leveraging a few other injected parameters. So we've got the state params, we've got state here as well, and we've got scope, which we don't actually need anymore in our application here. So we just need to pass in a couple of separate properties into our constructor. Anything in our constructor is going to get injected into our template. So our constructor performs the same function as kind of this thing here. So anything we provide in is going to be automatically injected in our AngularJS application. So let's first add a constructor. I'm going to pass a few things into our constructor. There we go. So I'm going to pass in the state params, the state, which you can see was also being passed in here, and the contact service again. Now we're going to store all of those as references in this property. And you can see it straight away, it's complaining that these properties don't exist on our class. And again, that's one of the really cool features of using classes, is you get this kind of error checking as you're typing instead of having to wait for when you run your application. So let's create a couple of different properties here. Now these ones we can actually make private because we're not going to use them in our template code. So anything you want to use inside your template code, you have to make public. Anything that's only going to be used from within your class here, you can make private. So I'm going to make this, the state is going to be private. We don't even need to define it on anything. And then again, state params, that's going to be private. You can see the errors disappearing at the bottom. Now let's make contacts public, because we are going to use that in our template code. And the last thing I want to add is the person property itself. And this is the person that we're going to be editing. So we need to store that person somewhere. And actually, let's make them equal to the empty object. Oh, let's go back to the top. There we go. Okay. So the final thing I want to do there is now that we've got the contact service, let's get the current user. Now, if you remember, if you scroll down below, what we're doing here is we're getting the email address from the state parameters. In fact, let's go to the root so you remember, figure out how this actually works. So with the edit controller here, the URL is being passed, the email of the person that we want to edit, and that's going to be passed as the state params property. So if we go back into our component here, you can see in our old controller logic here, we were getting the email address, passing it to the getPerson function on our contact service. That's going to return a person, and it's going to store it on the scope person. So we essentially need to do the same thing here. So we're going to do this dot person is equal to this contact. So this is the contacts here, the contact service, get person, and I'm going to also grab the email address from the state parameters, just like so. There we go. Okay, so now we've got the person. Let's now implement this save and remove functions here. In fact, what I can do is I can just copy and paste these into here. I'm just going to edit them to kind of clean them up and make them work in the new format. So first thing, we don't need the scope. And we can just specify a function like this. We don't need scope. Again, scope is now, well, in this case, it's this. And again, we don't need scope. Person is now on this object, so it's this.person. And again, we can do this.state.go. Okay, again, let's do the same thing with the remove function. Let's get rid of that. Clear that up. Change that to this, and then this.state.go. But seeing that we're here, let's also convert these to ES6 functions. So let's get rid of the function keyword there and then just add the fat arrow. And there we go. We now have converted our controller as a function constructor here to a ES6 class or TypeScript class above here. So really, really quick. You can see it doesn't really take a lot of effort. And it is really important to do now. I would recommend it's really important to do now because it does help when migrating to Angular later on. And all we're really doing at all of these stages is helping us move step by step towards Angular. But at the same time, we're also making our development experience in AngularJS better. Okay, so better. Now let's get rid of all of this at the bottom here. Okay. So again, just like before, we need to not create a controller, we need to create a component on the module. Now again, we get the selector from the person component.selector, and then the next thing we want to pass in is the actual person component object itself. Now I'm just going to format the document just to clean it up, make sure it adheres to a nice style guide. Excellent. And again, just like before, the next thing I have to do is convert it all to use the new controller as syntax. So we've got a couple of functions here and a couple of properties. We've got the person and contacts properties here. And then we've also got the save and remove functions. So I'm just going to keep an eye out for those in my template code and convert them all to using the controller as syntax with the ctrl.save at the top here. And I think I've got a couple of other places I'm using in ladder. Let me just do that properly. I'm using it in ladder here, and I believe I'm using it there, and I'm using it to call the remove function here. And I believe that is it. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to go through and I'm going to convert the rest of these all over to using this new component-based syntax that I'm showing you here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, I'm going to change the rest of them. If you want to follow along, you can pause the video and you can yourself go through and convert the rest of these controllers and directives over to components. So I'll see you in a second.